Welcome to the Personal Finance Professional Podcast. I'm Molly Birchall, Communications Executive for the Personal Finance Society. In this episode, I'll be talking to Hannah Green and Thomas Walker. In this episode of the podcast, we're discussing how to excel at CII qualifications. I'm joined by two of the CII's Qualification Prize winners, Hannah Green, winner of the Crawford UK Prize 2023, and the Dr. Alexander Scott Prize for the Certificate in Insurance Market Specialisation, and Thomas Walker, recipient of the Worshipful Company of Insurers Prize for the Diploma in Financial Planning. Hi, Hannah. Hi, Tom. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, Molly. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Molly.
Hi. So firstly, could you both give us a brief background on your qualification journey? Hannah, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Molly. So I joined the insurance industry in 2016, and I found that being surrounded with experienced and technically excellent colleagues with qualifications and designations really encouraged me to commence my own qualification journey. I very quickly completed my certificate in insurance, and after a break in studying, I decided to recommence my CII studies in 2019, completing both my diploma and advanced diploma qualifications in 2020 and 2022. I think each qualification journey is different, but having decided that university was not the right choice for myself, the CII qualifications offered an opportunity to qualify in a subject matter that was both relevant to my career and something that I was passionate about.
Amazing, thank you. And Tom, did you want to tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I've got a slightly different background in terms of, obviously, I've come into financial planning and financial advice, but I didn't start out in sort of a financial advice firm or, a local business. I was actually working in a warehouse at the time that I started my qualifications. But I was really interested in sort of investing and finance in general, and found the CII and obviously its sort of prestigious reputation, and decided to just basically give it a go. So I sort of ordered my first textbook, my first exam, and just started cracking with it. And then every sort of couple of months was completing a different exam, because I found that I was really enjoying what I was doing and getting a lot out of it, and decided, actually, this is something that I can actually take, seriously. It's not just perhaps, something of interest, but maybe I should look to get into this sort of industry. So I was finishing sort of my last few exams to get my diploma in financial planning just before COVID hit in February 2020. And at that point, things basically obviously shut down. It was really hard for a lot of people. So I kind of parked everything until I found work up. I'm from London originally, but I found work up in the northeast of England, in a big sort of financial planning investment firm. And basically they took me on. They helped me finish off the last of my qualifications, and I got qualified to level 4 standard as a financial advisor, basically. So that's my background. And yeah, so it's been a strange journey, but a good one.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, two different perspectives on that one, on how you got into the field. Okay, then sticking with you then, Tom, could you tell our listeners why you think there is value in doing these qualifications?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, the big thing about qualifications, particularly in financial planning, obviously there's been a big drive since the retail distribution review to, upskill and get qualified and demonstrate integrity and competence and all of these things through professionalization. So more qualifications, continuing professional development and things like that. So it is really important. And obviously that was in the back of my mind. But at the same time, for me, it wasn't just about, right, here's the exams that you need to pass and, scrape through on your 65, your 70%. I always went into all of the exams aiming to get full marks if I could, because at the end of the day, you're obviously looking to support people, whether it's like putting children through university or, securing a legacy for their family. So you want to do the best job you possibly can. And the way that you can do that, and the way that you can keep abreast of obviously the changing landscape and, make the most of like tax planning opportunities, is to get as wide a perspective as possible. So for me, that meant, the CII has comprehensive resources to help you learn the subject matter outside of just what you do in your day-to-day sort of role. So that was really important. And I found a lot of value in that. So yeah, as I say, it's really about getting that broad perspective. And again, I didn't just do the standard 6 modules that you get in financial planning diploma. I took a different route where I mixed and matched. So I took group risk, for example, which is a module from the insurance side of things, because I wanted that, comprehensive perspective when you're delivering holistic financial planning, rather than perhaps, specializing in investments or protection or something like that. I think you kind of see the bigger picture and really get the best opportunities possible for clients. So I think that's where the value lies, obviously demonstrating not just your competence overall, but your commitment to do the best job you possibly can for your clients, and obviously have that broad perspective with, such a comprehensive web of knowledge.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's great to hear. And Hannah, why do you feel professional qualifications such as those taken through the CII and the PFS are so important?
So I think, the CII and the PFS, as the insurance and financial services professional bodies, really do set the standards and expectations that our industries need to adhere to. And qualifications are evidence of an individual's knowledge, their specialism, their expertise, and of course, their commitment to their profession. I think whether you are an underwriter, a broker, in-house insurance-related role, or, as a financial services background as Tom does, these qualifications are important in demonstrating your technical proficiency, professional standing. I think in the very competitive world of insurance that we find ourselves in, qualifications provide that assurance, comfort and trust to employers, to our customers, to our clients, and to our own networks of an individual's competency, proficiency, and ability to excel. I think equally from a selfish perspective, perhaps, qualifications do offer the opportunity for the development of skill sets and honing of your craft, which can obviously broaden your career prospects and make you stand out amongst your peers. I think, as Tom alluded to in his answer, I think the goal of qualifications is to really be able to be the best that you can and do the best job you can in your role. And qualifications from the likes of the CI and PFS are a route and a mechanism that can be used to develop yourself professionally.
Yeah, I get it. Thank you. And now you've both been commended on your results in your qualifications. So firstly, congratulations. But could you talk us through what you did to achieve this? Tom, let's start with you.
Yeah, so my perspective is perhaps, again, maybe as a function of having such, an unusual path into the industry, it's perhaps a different one, because I know a lot of people, obviously, they go through, they'll skim through perhaps the textbook that's provided by the CII for each module, and then they might go and get some external resources and do some practice, with those and stuff, and then when they feel confident, sit the exam. But what worked well for me was taking, specific chunks of time. So what I would do is after work, and also by taking holiday days, I would block off perhaps, a 2-week period of time. And in that 2-week period of time, because I've set myself a very firm deadline, and to achieve something in that deadline, I would look to basically learn all the material for one particular module that I was doing. And what I would do, I would take every single textbook for every single module as I was going along, and I would read it from cover to cover, every single page, which I know is not very common, but I wanted to, the CII is providing this textbook for a reason. It's to help you pass the exam and give you the knowledge. So I wanted to absorb as much as I possibly could and get, the wider perspective that I've mentioned before. So the textbooks don't just have, obviously, questions to help you test your knowledge and things like that. They do provide quite a holistic perspective of perhaps why particular changes in legislation have occurred, different sort of strategies that people perhaps overlook sometimes. So I found great value in reading each textbook from cover to cover, making notes as I was going along, so that then I've got a comprehensive set of notes, using the sort of questions in the textbook to test myself, and also the exam guides that the CII produce and you can find online, which are basically like a sort of past paper where you can sort of test your knowledge under time conditions, sort of mimicking what it's like to be in the exam. I found those very useful as well. And they did seem to reflect the standard of questions that, the level of difficulty you get in the exam, which perhaps other resources that I've tested from external training providers are perhaps a little bit easier, I found, than sort of the questions the CII offer themselves. So as I say, it was very cut and dry for me. Block off a period of time, about 2 weeks, including sort of some holiday allowance, sit down, work as if it's my full-time job during the holiday allowance and after work, to read from cover to cover, make notes, test myself using all the CII resources available, including the exam guides. And then if I felt that based on my performance on the exam guide, that I'd done a good enough job and obviously got the material well under my grasp, then I would basically book in my exam. One tip I would give as well, instead of doing the 6 standard modules, which a lot of people do, I know that a lot of people, there's a module called RO6 on the financial planning side, which is testing your financial planning skills. It's a big sort of written question exam that a lot of people don't pass first time, and it can take them multiple attempts, and it's sort of 3 months between exam sittings. I didn't want to risk, potentially not passing first time, having to resit and waste that time. So what I did was actually take a different route where I mixed and matched other modules, which were multiple choice and, those sorts of questions where the answer is either right or wrong, rather than obviously the sort of subjectivity that's involved in certain questions around financial planning and things like that. So, there was a better chance of me passing. There was a better chance of getting more exams done because I could effectively do 1 exam a month in the 3-month period I would be waiting to do my RO6 exam. That helped me get all the knowledge in my head, be able to demonstrate it in an exam sitting. I still have the knowledge today. It's not like, I learned it for the exam and I've just forgotten it because I crammed and obviously, was doing anything sort of tactical like that. And I managed to, do really well and surprisingly find out that, that I'd won this award and this, commendation. So that's basically my process.
Amazing. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's very impressive. Hannah, what did you have to add for that?
Yeah, I think, I'm sure Tom and I can both agree that we both wanted to excel rather than simply scrape by and get a pass in our exams and coursework. So I would say for me, ultimately, it was a lot of hard work, dedication and commitment. I think perhaps different to Tom's approach is rather than blocking out an element of time, I would be studying in the mornings before work and then late into the evenings. However, I think, maybe the question of, how or what I did can be quite difficult to answer because I think everyone's approach to learning is different. So it is a matter of finding out what works best for you. So personally, I utilised my network quite a lot, including my line manager, my mentor at the time, to discuss what I wanted to achieve. So I'd probably say that one top tip I would give is make sure you bring those who can support you and make a difference in your studies along with you for the ride in your qualification journey. Additionally, I set myself goals and timelines for completing modules, A, to hold myself accountable, B, to keep my discipline, and C, to make sure I was maintaining the momentum. I also happened to be doing a lot of my studies during the pandemic. So there's nothing like a government lockdown or two, and, to give you a little bit of motivation or to simply stop you from getting bored. I think from a CII insurance qualification perspective, I think this can be quite different to the financial services structure of how to achieve a qualification. I think for the diploma in insurance and particularly the advanced diploma in insurance, there is quite a lot of coursework and essay questions. So in terms of things I did practically when working through these sorts of types of assessments, firstly, I think it's the merit of wider reading can't be underestimated. I did a lot of wider reading to make sure that my answers were as comprehensive as possible. And also, I think, I really focused on how I was structuring my answers and making sure that I was drawing upon necessary quotes and, citation of references to make my responses very powerful and meaningful. Additionally, I always then tried to think about the question in the context of my own professional role and tried to apply it to different scenarios and real life examples to assess my own level of understanding as I was working through it. And then for each question or essay I completed, I would allow myself some time for reflection and to self-critique and to really ask myself, have I answered the question and could I push the envelope further to secure an extra mark or two? And then the final thing that I perhaps wanted to touch upon was I did a specific dissertation module, which is the certificate in insurance market specialisation. So I imagine for a lot of people who see this dissertation module on the list, they might perhaps recoil in horror. But this was the module I most enjoyed, as it allowed me to base my dissertation on a topic of my choice, and I was able to have greater freedom to draw upon my own arguments and conclusions. The dissertation module allowed me to enhance my primary research skills. It gave me the opportunity to gain insights and knowledge from my peers, and I also had access to a specialist dissertation guide who was really useful in helping me through this process. And all of these are kind of things that I would not have had the opportunity to have access to had I not done the dissertation module. So what I would say just specifically on the dissertation module is for anyone who is thinking about that, why do you want to do this module? It had far greater meaning to me than obtaining my final credits to complete my advanced diploma. And finding a topic which really interests you can make all the difference.
Great, thank you. And really interesting to find out how both of you had two different approaches. And like you said, to work toward your strengths and identifying and understanding how you learn and knowing how you're going to apply your knowledge in the future is also really beneficial. So based on your answers then, Tom, I think you touched upon this question earlier in your answer, but did you use any of the CII study guides or other resources to help you with completing your qualifications?
Yeah, so as I mentioned sort of before, each and every sort of module that I did, there was a textbook, and we're talking, anywhere from about 250 to 400 pages. So it's very comprehensive sort of reference guide. And I still sort of refer back to points in them today, because obviously they're still very pertinent to what I'm doing. So yeah, it's just a case of, I read through, and it must have been thousands of pages in total to get qualified. And I'm not obviously saying everyone has to do that, but I found that it works for me. I would go into certain exams and the questions perhaps would seem a little bit unfamiliar, which is, to be expected, because you're not always going to get asked the same thing in the same way, or it might be sort of, phrased in a different way in order to try and test that you really do understand what you're talking about. So, I would sometimes find these slightly unfamiliar questions and then have a brainwave that actually, I'd read something about that, even just a single sentence I'd read, that was very similar in, this textbook with hundreds of pages. So, without having gone through, there's no way of knowing in advance what questions are going to come up on the exam anyway. So you can't sort of just try and make your best guess. If you're going to cover all your bases, go through page by page. And as I say, that can take some length of time, but I do think it is valuable to go through as much of the textbook as you can at least once. And then also, as I said, exam guides, which I found, fantastic for testing my knowledge, making sure that obviously I was able to respond quickly. A lot of the questions in terms of your investment exam and your taxation, and even indeed, some of the pension questions were quite convoluted in terms of all the calculations and the steps. And you've basically got 1 minute to sort of sit there and, write out all the answer and stuff and try and calculate it and make sure you've got everything right. So it's really good practice to use the exam guides. The only thing I would say is I wish the CII offered more of them.
Amazing. Thank you. And Hannah?
Yes, similarly to Tom, I use the CII study guides as, the foundations of the knowledge that I needed to know in order to obtain my qualification. I also used Revision Mate quite a lot, which for those who don't know is the kind of practice multiple choice question application that people who are studying can use in order to benchmark, I think, where you are in terms of what areas and topics you need to focus on more to make sure you get the marks that you need for your exams. I also found that the CI has a lot of wider reading content on the library, which I certainly found very useful when I was completing more of the essay and coursework modules. As I previously mentioned, I did find wider reading an important element of my studies, and to make sure that I was broadening my horizons beyond just the pages of the textbook. I think topical reading as well, such as keeping up to date with insurance-related articles online, the CII quarterly journals, and content from local institutes also made my approach to studying more well-rounded, really. For my dissertation module, I focused on primary research, and therefore I was using the resources of people around me, specifically undertaking a survey and an interview process. But then I used secondary research and wider reading in order to complement and enhance my findings for that particular module.
Great, thank you. So during your qualification journey, what has been your experience of the different testing methods, such as remote invigilation or the on-the-screen exams in the centres? Hannah, did you want to go first on this one?
Sure. So I have experienced both remote invigilation and the on-screen examination centre methods. And for me personally, they have been positive experiences and all. The on-screen exam centres, I think, can feel more traditional and perhaps more familiar to people. But in fact, I probably preferred the remote invigilation assessment method better. My remote invigilation encounter was by necessity due to the pandemic, but I think this option does provide greater flexibility for members, which is really important. And there's also some really useful guidance from the CII as to how you can prepare for remote invigilation and what you can expect on the day for those who are perhaps a little bit unsure about this option.
Great, thank you. And Tom, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so again, it's very different sort of perspective and experience from Hannah in that I stopped doing, the last few exams that I had left to do during the pandemic because I wasn't very keen on remote invigilation, because for me, what happens if your computer goes down, and I had that happen in a centre, like the computer had stopped working during my exam before. And obviously it's much easier to be resolved and things like that in an exam centre rather than, in your own home and stuff. And obviously I didn't want to be in that position where I'm panicking and I get distracted from actually just focusing on doing the exam and trying to ace it. So I only ever did both before the pandemic up to about February 2020 and then after the pandemic centre testing, both in London and also when I moved up to the Northeast for work in sort of the Northeast area as well. So I've got experience in a couple of different exam centres. They're both very sort of professional. They ran very smoothly. It was fantastic. I think, one of the big bonuses of working with the CII on sort of your exams is that there are so many exam sittings. So if you feel ready, like for example, you've done all your revision and your learning and you've aced like the practice tests you've done, you can go on a Friday, you can go on Monday morning, and there's probably going to be an exam centre within sort of 10, 15 miles for most people in the country that you can go to actually do the exam on the Monday morning when you feel like you've peaked, rather than obviously, as people have done for university and school and so on, having to wait for perhaps months and, mix in loads of different tests and everything can get muddled in your head. So I found that very useful that, as I say, I would, as soon as I was ready, say I'd finished the Thursday or Friday and I felt really confident, I'd book in straight away 9 o'clock Monday morning in the local exam centre to do that. And I'd go down there. And as I say, there've been positive experiences. The invigilators have been great. And I really can't fault the level of service that's on offer for sort of going in and doing exams yourself. And also for me as well, it helps get you in that headspace. So obviously, if you've got an hour or a 2-hour exam, to go into an exam centre with the formality of having to sign in, queue, be sat in complete silence with loads of other people around you, really focused on, achieving the best result that they can as well in their exams. Because lots of people, you can be in a room with people doing all different sorts of exams. You're not all doing the same exam, which, was a bit crazy, but it was good fun. So being in that exam centre really helped me to ground myself and, get focused, stay completely focused, not get distracted and feel like, this is now or never. It's, this one chance. And obviously I could resit, but I didn't want to. So here I am, and here I'm going to do this exam. And instead of being in your house and maybe certain pictures on the wall distract you, or because you feel obviously more relaxed at home, and it's where you come home to after work to sort of chill out rather than, be focused perhaps on doing an exam. So for me, as I say, it's the opposite from Hannah a bit, but I like to really go in, do the exam, make the formality out of it. And as I say, really get my head down and then just do the best that I can.
Good. Yeah, it's good to hear two different perspectives on that note. So do you have any plans for any further qualifications, Tom?
So once I'd got sort of all the credits I needed to accumulate to get my diploma, because as I say, I went through a route of mixing and matching. So you need to do more exams than sort of the 6 you would do just by going the standard route. Once I'd got to that stage, it was a case of I've got my level 4, which is kind of, your benchmark. And then it's a case of, I looked at level 6 exams and considered what my employer really was looking for at the time. And one of the big areas of focus that was coming in, because I had moved, basically joined my company, I'd moved into a compliance role. So analysing other advisors' advice basically and seeing, is it suitable? Is the regulator going to be happy with the advice they're providing, and providing a sort of consultancy service on that basis? And then I'd sort of moved into business development. So working with financial advisors to get the best products for clients and things like that. I had the perspective of the impending consumer duty, which obviously has made big sort of waves across the, certainly the financial advice industry from my perspective, in terms of the level of detail and documentation needed to prove that financial advisors really are acting in the best interests of their clients. And a big element of that was vulnerability as well. So in financial advice, the age of an advisor is on average late 50s, and it's getting older by about a year every year. The client base of financial advisors tends to be of a similar sort of demographic. So it does trend towards sort of the older generations. And so there's a lot of vulnerability, potentially issues to consider there. So I decided to pursue long-term care planning module and did that and passed that as well. So, it was a case of looking at what opportunities and what sort of timely and current and what my employer needed at the time, and sort of focusing on that. And then since then, I've definitely got my eye on perhaps other modules to do in future. But to make really holistic, from my point of view, I've got a lot of the sort of financial planning and the insurance things. A lot of advisors do things with estate planning and, as I mentioned, sort of vulnerability and things like that. I've branched out to look at health as well. So not just helping families plan for the future and get their finances in order, which obviously the CII qualifications have helped me to do, but also to look at health and how I can help clients improve their health to make the most of, obviously, the advice in terms of getting their finances sorted and leaving legacies and things like that. So for me, my development is going to continue to be very sort of multifaceted, probably weaving in some CII qualifications and other sort of areas of study to make a sort of multidisciplinary approach. But definitely I'm committed to continuing to increase my knowledge and keep abreast of, obviously, the changing landscape that we're seeing. Even seems to be at the moment, I don't know if it's just me, but every single month you almost can't predict what the next month's going to hold, because everything's just changing so fast at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you. So do you have any plans on any further qualifications, Hannah?
So I would say not at present. Yeah, and the reason why I say this is that I'm a believer in sort of both the practical approach to learning and then obviously the academic approach for our qualifications needs to go hand in hand. So whilst it makes sense for my next step in terms of qualification to be the fellowship, I want to focus on getting a few years of insurance under my belt doing my day job in order to then think about what should be the right step in terms of qualifications. I think, as Tom also mentioned, the landscape is changing incredibly quickly. So I think it is, I quite like to have one eye in terms of what is coming down the pipeline in terms of possible new future qualifications, depending on what that landscape looks like in the future, looking at emerging risks to then make the judgment call as to what is going to be my next development goal.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you. So is there any other tips or advice you would like to share with those who may be preparing for exams at the moment? Tom, did you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I've really sort of tried to rack my brains about, what advice I can give to someone, who's perhaps considering doing the exams, or even if they're sort of like going through the exams at the moment. And I tried to distill my approach down into a few kind of key pieces of advice and what I think the things that generate the most results. And then obviously you can then flesh out any gaps. And for me, it comes down to sort of mindset, controlling your own development as much as possible and doing the work. So what I mean by that is, in terms of mindset, it's like I've alluded to and also Hannah's alluded to, you want to sort of, if you can, go into the exams with the mindset of doing absolutely the best you can. So you're not aiming for your 65 or your 70% to pass. You're aiming for 100% if you can. And what's behind that? You want to do the best job for your clients. You want to have, the most knowledge you can. So you need to perhaps frame things in your head that that's what you're going in there to achieve, because then once you start to think in that way, rather than, what sort of shortcut perhaps can I try and take to get just about passing, you start to respond differently and act in different ways where you do block off that time and you are disciplined, as Hannah mentioned, in terms of building momentum and making sort of the changes perhaps you need to, flicking them in around sort of your lifestyle and your work to actually do the work that's required. In terms of controlling your own development, I know it's not possible for everyone, but I basically self-funded all my qualifications. I know a lot of employers do hold the purse strings and therefore can control the arc that people follow to a greater degree. But I felt that, retaining as much independence as possible meant that I could pick and choose the best path for me. So I was learning about things that I was interested in. It meant that I had, more motivation to actually do well and get through hundreds of pages of textbooks and hundreds of test questions and so on. And also it meant that I could frame my study in terms of what I felt perhaps is going to be more useful in the future, rather than just the standard path that's set out for everyone. So you don't have to go along that path. And if you can mix and match, even if your employer's funding it, and perhaps you can say, look, I think because I do this in my job, or this is becoming a really sort of important issue in the industry, I would like to perhaps do this instead. I think it's a conversation that's definitely worth having. And then doing the work is just quite straightforward, but sitting down and getting things done. If you sit there and perhaps think about what can go wrong, or the enormity of like when the thud of the textbook hits the floor, when your textbook gets delivered to your house, that 400, 500 page textbook, it can be intimidating perhaps, but you need to not really think about that and just think about what are you setting out to achieve? What do you need to do? The textbook's there. I've demonstrated through being able to get the results that I have that you can just use the textbook and all the CII resources to get a fantastic result. So you just need to, take a step back, not get in your own head, and just work steadily through things, as both me and Hannah have done, in chunks of time, day by day, and, put one foot effectively in front of the other and you will get there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Great advice. And Hannah?
I've probably got maybe 5 top tips I would sort of recommend to people. And the first that would be is, set a desired qualification deadline date if you can, and then work backwards to structure in your mind how you're going to do it, create a revision schedule, and monitor your progress with regular check-ins. I think secondly, it would be, if at first you don't succeed, try again. If you're not getting the desired results, don't be afraid of trial and error or going back to the drawing board to figure out a different way of doing things. I think, as Tom and I have both sort of shown through this conversation today, we've got very different ways of doing things in terms of our own learning. And everyone else will find that they have a right way of doing it, but it might not be the same way as everybody else's. I would say, thirdly, reflect on your answers. I would say allow yourself time to read your answers from a different mindset, a different perspective, and challenge what you've written to make sure that you're not missing anything. I think particularly with the coursework questions, I would always cross-reference the marking guide to make sure that you're addressing the question correctly and you're meeting all the elements of the marking criteria in one way or another to increase your chances of success and scoring higher marks. I would say, fourthly, utilise your network. I think the insurance and financial services industries have great community spirit. So don't be afraid to connect with peers and colleagues who have undertaken qualifications or who are perhaps still doing them, so you can understand and learn from their experiences. People can be a valuable source of advice and guidance, and there may be things that colleagues and peers wish they'd known when they were completing their qualifications that you can then take on board and learn from. And then finally, I think this is the most important tip of all, is self-belief. Of course, qualifications are a lot of hard work and people may feel stressed or anxious about upcoming exams. But ultimately, an exam or a coursework question is there to demonstrate what you know. So provided you know your subject matter, you're going to be fine. And I think, as strange as it may be to say, try to enjoy the process of securing a qualification. I think it's important to remember those little wins, such as completion of a coursework question or an exam or a module. I think that end feeling, once you achieve your qualification, is absolutely amazing, and it will be a massive boost to your confidence. But there is a journey to get there. So you need to make sure that you are allowing yourself a little bit of self-love as you're going through that journey.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. So finally, what advice would you give to any professionals wondering whether to begin learning through the CII and the PFS?
Yeah, I think for anyone who is thinking about starting their qualification journey, my question back to them would be, why wouldn't you? From my perspective, don't have much to lose from a qualification, only something to gain in the form of, professional development, status, or knowledge. When I speak to peers who have completed qualifications, the common sort of response is, I wish I'd started this sooner. So I advise to anyone thinking about commencing their studies is research to understand what it involves, such as the hours taken, the compulsory and optional topics that you will have access to, and the assessment methods. Before, you need to look at these things before you move forward. As I mentioned previously, I think networks can be a great asset, so I'd encourage people to have conversations with those who have already qualified or are in the process of doing so, to kind of gain further first-hand insights as to what can be expected. I think with anything, including a qualification, is it going to take time? Yes. Is it going to take commitment? Yes. But is it going to be worth it as that end result? Absolutely.
Great, thank you. And Tom?
Yeah, so I think, the advice that Hannah gave there was fantastic. I've got a couple of other things to touch on. I just say sort of give it a go. So you can't, at the beginning of your journey, sort of know where you're going to end up or how much work it's actually going to need. I can sort of do a job here of trying to explain it to you, but you're still not going to grasp it until you do it yourself. So I would say give it a go. And that doesn't mean necessarily sit down and, today commit yourself to doing, a slew of these exams and hundreds of hours and thousands of pages of reading and so on. But maybe just pick one module that perhaps piques your interest and give it a go and see how you get on. But rather than perhaps just casually do it, actually, do it properly, but just start small. So you get the textbook and you read through it and you sit there and you're preparing almost to actually go and do the exam and see, look, am I enjoying this? Is it too much of a slog for me? Is it helping me in my day-to-day job? And am I picking up on things that I didn't used to at work because I'm reading about them in sort of like the textbook and things like that? So start small and give it a go. And then also, I would say perhaps maybe fund some of your own learning. So whether that's purchasing additional resources to help you succeed and make you feel more confident that you actually are on the right track, or whether it's maybe part or fully funding, maybe even just one module. By doing so, you give yourself skin in the game, because there is a trap that perhaps some people can fall down where, because an employer or, a funding body or someone else is paying for qualification, people can almost see an exam sitting as like a free run, because obviously, they're not paying for it. And then obviously if they have to resit then at that point, they then perhaps have to pay for it themselves. But if you put some of your own money where your mouth is and get some skin in the game, you do become a lot more committed. Obviously, you don't want to lose the money by having to pay again to resit. And it gives you sort of that focus and that drive, because you've got money behind you. And it's not just perhaps, as me and Hannah have both said, a set deadline that you want to work to and that you intend to sort of work to. You've actually got a financial incentive to do so, which is, as obviously as finance professionals, we all know is a very powerful driver for a lot of people.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I think that brings it all to a close. So thank you, Hannah and Tom, for joining me on the podcast today. It was really interesting to hear your experience and insight in completing your qualifications, and also the tips and advice that you've shared today.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you very much for having us, Molly.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Personal Finance Professional Podcast. For more podcasts and useful links, visit pfp.thepfs.org/podcasts. Until next time, goodbye.